is my connection okay? Because sometimes I feel like we might be cutting out.
It's also that I'm gonna be cutting out because China with firewalls and stuff.
Oh, true, true.
But so far so good. I always disconnect from the VPN, and yeah, I think maybe that's something you guys can help solve as well, since you're getting all these nodes throughout the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Do you think that that's eventually going to be one of the use cases that that Harmony can be used as a VPN or something along those
I
lines?
I don't think Harmony itself will be the VPN. There may be some sort of D app that leverages Harmony to create a decentralized VPN. I can see that. There's a lot of
Right.
people working on similar problems like Orchid, and I mean, there's a ton of people. I feel like eventually there will be sort of a Tor type of network that is, it has some sort of crypto um, economy behind it, driving it.
Yeah, there has to be an incentive model um, to support it. Tor right now is completely volunteer support.
Exactly.
And that's why I thought maybe, with what you guys are doing on the Pangaea side, if you get enough
Yeah.
nodes out there, that could be the solution. And I love the game. I just, yeah, I'm spinning up my node later this week, actually, after I talk to a few people.
Oh, no way. That's so cool to hear.
Yeah, well, I think that as far as ways to get people into committing their hardware to supporting a network, it's brilliant. Give some gamification to the process, and also it takes down that it's no longer scary, right?
Yeah.
Because all these games we're playing were kind of nodes anyway. Like if you're playing World of Warcraft, you're part of that world. It's not the same, but you're devoting resources anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
So how's Pangea going?
Wait, are we rolling, by the way? Have we already started or?
We are rolling, my man,
Oh,
unedited, raw.
so this happened to me before on an interview where I didn't know if we had started or not. Pangea is going really well. Like you said, we're really trying to lower the barrier to entry for people that want to be involved in blockchain and cryptocurrency. So, and we think that a sharded network, a sharded architecture is kind of unique for that. And we specifically designed the protocol so that you don't have to have some crazy mining rig or validating setup in order to participate. So that's really the core value proposition, not only of Pangea but also Harmony, right? That we want to really have a global community of validators. We want to be as decentralized and distributed as possible, because what that means is that our network will actually be more robust. Not only our community will be more robust because we'll have representation from all these different countries and all these different cultures, but it'll be harder for anyone to try to take Harmony down because we'll just be so resilient. And so Pangea is going really well. It took us a while. There was a lot of nodes down, shards were coming down, but that's all part of the process. You know what I mean? It's all learning for us.
When you're actually building something in the real world, not everything goes perfect. It's the ones where they have nothing to say, anything went wrong. Those are the people you should be suspect of. So yes, we expect this.
Exactly, and that was the thing is not only an education for the people that are running the nodes. We want people for them to experience what it's like to participate, right? So it was all about people, even if you never even touched command line, you never opened a terminal window before. We wanted you to feel comfortable and be confident that you can be part of this. But on the other side is also for us to learn in advance what it will really be like when our network is fully public, and to have
Yeah,
all.
and I'm going to share the article that you guys have. I'm going to put in the underneath. I think the phases you have are fantastic, where at that third phase you're incentivizing people to attack the network. You're going to throw in some chaos there to see how things react. It's obviously a very well thought out plan.
Yeah.
So how many
Yeah,
nodes
well,
are you at
we
right
have
now?
we have Gizem on our team. Thanks for that. Just a shout out to Gizem, who's Harvard Business School. she's taking some time off from Harvard Business School to work with us, and she's the one who masterminded Pangaea, along with a bunch of
We
many other.
need a shout out to Gizem. Well done. Yes, I will make sure.
Anyone out there who's participating in Benji will know Gizem, and they know Chris and a lot of the other engineers who have been supporting. So it's been a team effort. But Gizem was sort of the one who crafted the vision of, hey, this is what we stand for, and this is what Pangaea is going to be, and how we're going to include as many people as possible. So.
What's the node count at right now?
That's a good question on what the node count is right now. I wish I had synced up with Gizem.
Probably, last I checked, you were way over 1,000. Are you in the 2,000 range, or?
I think it's probably between 1,000 and 2,000. We had signups from over 96 countries as well. So it's pretty global, which is really fun to see. And even actually Gizem went out and plotted first it was just the countries. We plotted all the countries, but she even went out and plotted the different cities. So it's really cool to see, there's one guy running a node out in the middle of these islands off of Portugal, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. I felt kind of sad because I'm from Hawaii and there's no node in Hawaii. I should get some of my friends to run a node.
That has to be your personal mission, bro. That has to be your personal mission.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, it makes sense that, correct me if I'm wrong, the main criticism against proof of work is the centralization.
The main criticism against proof of work is it centralizes? That's your question?
Because right now you're focusing on having as many participants in the consensus process. Is that the...
So I want to make two distinctions. One is there's proof of work as a Sybil resistance, and there's proof of work which often gets conflated with Nakamoto consensus.
Right.
And then there's proof of stake, which is actually mostly just Sybil resistance, and then you have some consensus layer that's sort of sitting on top of that. So proof of Nakamoto consensus is proof of work based, and it tends to lead to centralization because of the fact that, if you have to, the more mining that you can do yourself, then there's sort of economies of scale, where the more machines that I have in my place, the lower my cost becomes, and I can buy more machines and so forth. So it does kind of have the centralizing effect. Whereas proof of stake, in theory, there are other problems with proof of stake in that in order to participate, you have to already own tokens. So you have to buy your way in, whereas proof of work, theoretically, you don't have to own tokens to participate. You just have to buy the hardware. So the participation is separate from the token itself. So it's sort of a trade-off. I wouldn't say that one is more decentralized than the other.
100%. I don't want to. Yeah, there are trade-offs in all of this. I like that you didn't go straight to an environmental reason. That's really what I wanted to hear, because that's one that I think is one of the weakest arguments between the proof of stake, proof of work, and different ways of. And I like the fact that you also made the distinction of Nakamoto consensus. But, and we can get into the discussion of big blocks, small blocks, and hardware requirements, right? So that's what I'm trying to figure out is the real motivation for effective proof of stake, and we're going to dive into that in a second. Is the real motivation there to get it as decentralized as possible, or was there some other, is it more about scalability?
Yeah, well, so before diving into effective proof of stake, I want to also talk about just our consensus being the fact that we're a sharded algorithm, a sharded protocol, means that we can have many, many more nodes than a normal proof of stake protocol. So for example, you might be familiar with EOS or Tron. There's a lot of delegated proof of stake protocols.
Right.
The reason they do that is it's more scalable. The fewer validators you have, the faster your network can go. Because it's sort of like running a democracy. When you have 1,000 people making a decision, it's going to be slower than like just 21, for example, right? But sharding solves that problem, and it makes it so you can have these smaller committees, but you can have multiple of them. So it allows us to scale while remaining decentralized in terms of having lots and lots of nodes, and yet still being a fast protocol. And in fact, the coolest part, the feature of sharded protocols is that the more nodes you have, the faster the overall network runs. So it's actually kind of like the opposite of a normal, just single chain proof of stake.
And that's specifically because that's sharded.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I think Robjan also wrote a great article about, the 4 different ways limited resources can be distributed, being the lottery, the bidding, the waiting in line, and then the reputation-based one. So the EOS that you brought up is a reputation-based one, whereas Harmony is on the bidding side, if I'm correct.
Yeah, so well, why don't we just dive into effective proof of stake?
Let's do it. EOS, effective, because we don't want ineffective proof of stake. We want effective proof of stake.
Yeah. So for anyone out there who wants to learn more, there's a blog post on this. If you search on our Medium,
I'll put the link.
It's a design that Ranjan first proposed, and then kind of the team came together and we made some modifications. But basically we saw this problem with basically selecting your validator pool in a proof of stake algorithm, proof of stake protocol. Sorry. And they're sort of different. They're different ways, right? You can have just people, I stake as much as I want, and then the top 100 or the top X validators get chosen. Or you can do it like Ethereum, where there's a flat rate, like 32 Ether. If you have this much, then you're given a spot in the lottery, and then let's say 100 of those lottery tickets get selected each round. So there's sort of like there's a bunch of different ways of choosing your validator pool. But the problem with each one of them is, so if you have a fixed amount for each sort of ticket to become a validator, what happens is that as I get selected and I earn more of those tokens, I can't restake them because that rate stays fixed. So then what do I do? Maybe I'll sell it, or I don't know what to do with it, right? I can't really compound my growth as a staker. So that's one problem. But on the other side, if you only choose the top 100 people, then you can have a huge variance in the amount of stake that each person has. And so we kind of want each person we want it to be more balanced, so that everyone's kind of on the same level. But we don't want to impose that just flat rate. So what effective proof of stake is it's a bidding scheme where the top, it's the same. So in our case, there's 1,600 validator slots. And so 1,600 nodes. And the middle, we take the median bid from the top 1,600, and that sets sort of a midpoint. And anyone who has bid more than 15% more than that median bid, or 15% less, is still pegged to 85% of the median bid or 115%. So if let's take an example to make it more real, because this is probably getting kind of confusing, or maybe I should get a whiteboard. But let's say the median bid is 101 tokens. Then if I bid 200, then obviously I have a slot. I may be at the top of the whole list. I may have bid the most, but my reward will only be proportionate to 115 tokens. So basically that extra 85 tokens that I have aren't really adding anything to my reward. So what I should do is then delegate those tokens to someone else, right? So then what happens on the other hand, if I were staking and I only staked 51, but I made it into the top 1,600, I am getting a outsized return, staked 85 one. So basically people have an incentive to me to raise my rate up to 85. So it kind of, what it ends up happening is it kind of balances everyone around this median point. It doesn't impose a strict limit, but it kind of keeps everyone within this range. And so that kind of makes it more balanced. So that's it's effective proof of stake, because basically the amount you stake is not necessarily the amount of reward that you get. There's a sort of a calculation, so that end amount that you get rewarded is your effective stake.
Yeah, and ultimately these are all ways to tweak these formulas to make the incentive models in line with what the philosophy is.
Exactly.
You want to make sure that as many people participate and it's fair. That way, if maybe you don't have the same amount of resources, but you have a great reputation, you can still have a reason to participate. You're going to get an outsized reward, whereas somebody else who has such a high stake, they're not going to get the same return on investment. They're going to delegate it to somebody else.
Yeah, and it's also sort of like if you, let's say you care more about stability, like you want to make sure that you will get a spot, you can always stake more. There's no reason why you can't. You can stake as much as you want, and then you're going to be guaranteed that you're going to be in the top 1600, so you won't lose your spot. But then you won't get necessarily the most efficient reward per se. And so it kind of, yeah, like you said, we're trying to keep the philosophy of keeping everyone kind of balanced and on the same page. And in theory, if everyone is compounding and staking together, then the median should kind of move up in a proportionate way, and everyone gets carried with it, right? So that's what we really want to see.
And I explain to a lot of people that the whole blockchain world isn't necessarily a technological revolution, but it's one in human behavior and game theory.
Exactly.
Figure out these incentive models that just keep us all honest and at the same time incentivized to contribute to the network. Now, one of the things that I'm always trying to learn more about for proof of stake models is what do we look to say, you know what, the way EOS is doing it, that seems to be working well, versus the way, I don't know, Tezos is doing it, or Polkadot. And there's just so many different variables somebody could look at. Do you look at node count? Do you look at transaction amounts? Do you look at market cap? Which obviously you don't. But what are those variables that you prioritize to look, sit back after a certain amount of time and say, this is the direction that's working?
That's a really good question. In fact, I think that's something that the entire industry is still deciding on. It's still kind of, the jury's out so far, but we have good guesses. And I think, from our perspective, there's a few priorities that we're keeping in mind when we're crafting our economic model. One of them, obviously, is to maintain decentralization, right? Because decentralization, as we said, is core to the value proposition of any blockchain protocol. And it's also core to the security of the protocol. The more decentralized you are, the more resilient you are to all kinds of attacks on the network. So that's key, right? And that's one of the things that effective proof of stake tries to do, is tries to keep that decentralization and balance. But another piece of it is very much that we also want the protocol to accrue value in the long term. We want it to become a store of value. So in some ways, even though you were saying market cap isn't something you look at, I think in the short term it's definitely not. But in the long term, I feel like any crypto network, if it's meant to, even if it is not a store of value like Bitcoin at its core, like it's not just digital gold, even if it's a smart contract platform, that smart contract platform has to secure assets on top of it. There are going to be assets embedded in it, and therefore and especially in proof of stake, the security actually comes from the value of the token. So you kind of have this chicken or egg feedback loop thing, where the more valuable the token is, the more secure the network is, and therefore the more value people are comfortable putting on top of your network. So there is a bit of, I do think at the end of the day, I mean, in the near term, market cap, whatever, it goes all over. It's a speculator's game to some degree, but in the long term, I think it actually will be one of the key differentiations between different protocols, and what defines a successful economic model versus an unsuccessful one.
That's interesting, because I mean, that makes me think that if you get in early enough, you become the apex predator of that consensus space, right? Like, for example, EOS, they could just look at their model and say, uh-oh, we're not, this isn't sustainable. What these guys at Harmony are doing, that looks, and then migrate, slowly deploy a different, because I understand what you're saying. The more money there, the more secure. And it comes back to this, like, the same thing with Bitcoin that you brought up. Like, today, there are probably coins that have come out that have a better technological stack, let's say, than Bitcoin does.
Yeah.
But just because of raw, the amount of people participating, the market cap and whatnot, Bitcoin's not, has covered that space. A Zcash can't come in and say, well, I've got privacy too. It's too late, bro. We're all on Bitcoin. Is that, is like, for example, EOS, is its success attributed specifically to its protocol, or more to maybe the marketing or the way the token sale started in the beginning, resources?
It's really hard to say, but I will say this, that even, you were saying that, let's say EOS is watching someone like Harmony or Tezos or some other protocol doing something and seeing like, wow, that's actually really good, we should imitate that. It's actually not as easy as you'd think, because even just the architecture of the protocol can kind of define what you can and can't do. And it's not so simple to just change the architecture of everything, because it's not just a technology issue. I mean, the technology itself, that is hard. How are you going to just transition your chain to something new? But it's also that there's a social element to it, or like a people element, which is that you have so many stakeholders at that point. If you're already, have $1 billion market cap, there's so much vested interest in the way that the protocol is right now, that if you try to change it, some people might win, other people might lose. It's going to be very contentious. So I think it's more difficult than you'd think to kind of change the economics. And in some ways, actually, I mean, one of the important things to do if you're going to accrue value in the long run is to have a very clear economic model that you adhere to, right? Think about Bitcoin, the fact that it started out at the very beginning saying, hey, this is the supply, and it's going to max out at 21 million, in 140 years. And that has become, like the dogma. It's the doctrine of Bitcoin. If you try to change that, just think about how destructive that would be. You can't change it, and it's the same for a lot of protocols. I mean, I think governance. People have really kind of played up governance, but at the end of the day, you need to communicate that long-term vision for people to really latch onto you and say, this is where I'm going to plant my flag. I want to be part of this protocol. It's like founding a country. You know what I mean? You have the Constitution. You guys all sign the Constitution, and that defines you. Like, the United States, we can't just rewrite the Constitution tomorrow and be like, oh yeah, it's cool. Like, we're just restarting. It doesn't work like that.
And then we changed our mind. Let's go back. We made a mistake. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's some great articles about how you quantify immutability, and one of them it was written by Yaz Kuri. I'll put it in the links as well. But one of them is that flakiness, right? The changing certain things on the outset. So I hear you. It's very tough for any of them to change out of the gate. It might, again, a lot of this technology can be emulated. Like if for whatever reason, we all see that ZK snarks is the way to go. Bitcoin could adopt it, maybe slowly and whatnot. But it seems that in POS models, it's harder because so much of that is ingrained in the community, the people in it. rather than the technology stack. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good assessment. But I think it's true even of proof of work chains too. But yeah, there's so many interdependencies. You know, you can't. That's the beauty and what's so difficult about blockchain is that you have so many things at play simultaneously, and all of the recipe has to be just right. If one thing is missing, then the whole thing can kind of come toppling down.
What do you think is going to happen with Ethereum's migration to proof of stake, in ETH 2.0?
That's a very good question. And actually, when I was on the panel with Darren from ETC Labs, one of the things that we talked about afterwards was the fact that Ethereum Classic is actually kind of positioned it has an interesting positioning as ETH tries to transition to ETH 2.0, because I think that there are some people who may think that actually staying the course, the original vision of just proof of work, might be the right way. I mean, we're seeing a lot of cool product market fit in decentralized finance on ETH as it is. And so maybe people will want to kind of, I can see that there's definitely going to be part of the community that does not want to make the transition. On the other hand, I think that because there's such strong leadership from Vitalik and others, a lot of the community will follow that transition. So Ethereum is unique in that it has such strong leadership that everyone seems pretty committed to following, and doesn't really question. And that's partly because they're very transparent. They're also very thorough, and so everything they say is so well thought through that you can't really argue with it. But I think it will cause a split in the community, but probably I think a majority of the community will go with the transition.
Okay, and that because they're an example of where they're going to make this kind of crazy Ivan change in technology.
Yeah.
So there are examples. It's just not easy, right? Because they've been trying to do this now for quite a long time.
Well, I think that, again, there's two sides of it. One is that they've been trying to do it from just creating the architecture, and now they have most of the architecture down, and it's very impressive kind of what they've laid out. And now the challenge is building it and testing it, and they're now kind of in that phase. But then the real challenge, and the thing that will probably be the most defining, is the social element, right? When they try to make it live, the coordination of getting everyone to migrate their ETH over to this new chain and to then get this whole thing started, it's going to be quite an undertaking, actually. So it's going to be, it'll be historic. You know what I mean? It'll be really interesting to see how it all plays out, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong, frankly. But at the same time,
do you think the more of the issue is going to be getting enough validators, getting enough nodes, staking, or is it going to be what the miners do? Where do you think the highest amount of risk is?
From just our, frankly, limited experience running public networks like Pangaea, the risks are often in things that you just didn't foresee, right? So that's a kind of a cop-out answer from me, but I mean, I think that there's just a lot of different things. I think it's just, as I said, very hard to coordinate such a massive shift in a decentralized organization. And frankly, Ethereum, one of its strengths is it's quite decentralized, but that's also what makes it so difficult. That's kind of the other what's the word, paradox of these of blockchain communities, is the fact that you got to be as decentralized as possible, because that's where the value comes from. But you also, the more decentralized you are, the harder it is for you to actually get anything done that requires coordination of the entire community at once to come to agreement and do one thing.
And not only coordination within your community, but also coordination with some of these other chains now. I mean, interoperability is becoming more and more apparent. I mean, you guys have so many partnerships going on too.
Yeah, yeah. Interoperability is a really exciting space. I think we're seeing a lot of breakthroughs coming on with, actual trustless pegs between chains. I think there's still a lot of innovation that has to come online, but yeah, undoubtedly we're going to start to see more ability for chains to connect to one another, and that's going to be also super interesting. I mean, that's what I love about blockchain is the whole industry moves so quickly, and things that were just kind of hypothesized a few years ago. Really smart people have been working that whole time to build it, and now we're finally starting to see all of this come to fruition. And so it's going to be an exciting few years as we kind of enter a new era of blockchain, not only having all these new age or what's the word next generation blockchains coming online like Harmony, as well as just this like more rich layer 2 and interoperabilities kind of connecting them all. So it's like a Cambrian explosion of all this innovation, and frankly it can go any way. Like no one if any investor tells you like, oh, I know exactly what's going to happen, you shouldn't listen to them. I think anyone who's worth their salt is just kind of like, well, let's watch it, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and over time, I think there's a few things that are becoming more solidified. There are certain things you want to hear as an alarm bell. Like anytime I hear somebody say we're trying to replace Bitcoin, that's where my alarm bells go off, right? Because
Yeah.
I feel that has been ossified to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Looking at other POS models, I think that the market cap is such a good after you explained it, it makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Harmony's market cap isn't representative of kind of the work and potential. Which POS model do you think is overvalued today?
Ooh, that's a controversial question to answer. I would say I definitely think that delegated proof of stake models are overvalued. I mean, on the one hand, having a small group of block producers, what that does for you is it creates kind of like a council, right? You have 21 people who are making quite a bit of money by having this elevated position. And what that does is then those people want to then promote the protocol themselves. So they kind of become emissaries, So there are some advantages to delegated proof of stake. But on the other hand, I do feel that ultimately the scalability gains that you get don't sort of counterbalance the losses of decentralization that you get. And so I think in the long run, unless they sort of are able to expand and decentralize more, I feel like those models are overvalued.
Right, because I mean, as you said, 21. There's a lot at stake for those 21 people, or those 21 organizations. It's much more centralized than the 1,600 slots. So, what's the risk there? I mean, because it sounds like they'll be able to scale fast because it's 21, less people, faster decision making. Market cap is already high, and that's connected to security.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that I agree on one direction or the other. I'm just trying to figure this out, right? So if there's a higher market cap and you have faster decision making, what happens? Like, is it ultimately a government goes and shuts down 10 of the validators? Is that the black swan event, or not, maybe not the black swan event, but is that the moment where, okay, this is now broken?
Yeah, so I want to add something, right, which is that security is not just from the market cap and the value of the coin. There's also definitely in some ways the economic security, right? But it also comes from decentralization. like often people make this trilemma, right, of security, scalability, and decentralization. The thing is that actually security and decentralization are kind of similar, right?
For sure. For
There's
sure.
security on the cryptographic level, which is like, okay, well, this consensus is secure, but there's also security on the real world level.
The social level. Yeah.
Yeah, you take a step back and you realize, like, okay, well, we're running a very disruptive new technology that, frankly, can be either attacked directly by nation states if they don't like what you're doing, which is very, and we can really see that happening sometime in the future. And also, it's not just that nation states might attack it, but there's collusion, right? The network itself, there might be some people inside that are like, hey, I'm going to use them. I'm going to become like the dictator of this network, right? So there's kind of two different sides of that. And in a delegated proof of stake, having only 21, board seats or whatever, the block producers, it's easier to be targeted by a nation state. And it's also easier for someone to go in and be like, hey, I'm going to make buddies with everyone and we're going to collude and kind of own this whole thing. So the security is also tied to decentralization. And that's why I'm saying that they are not as secure as they might look from the outside.
No, and that's exactly why you need to have something like Pangaea to spread it out to as many people as possible to defeat the odds of something like this happening. Where if something goes wrong over here, there's another 1,599 people that can continue this work. Everybody around the world, it's your job now to get it to Hawaii, and then anybody watching also should get involved because running your own node is kind of like the first step into blockchain, right?
Exactly, right? If you want to, like, that's also our philosophy, right? We just want more people to be part of this movement. Blockchain and cryptocurrency is not a technology as much as it is a social movement. It's a way for just normal human beings, wherever they are in the world, if they can connect to the internet, they can be part of something new, a new economic model, a new way for us all to coordinate our energy and our value and create something that we can all participate in and we can all have a claim in. And it starts with you, right, running your own node and actually learning about it and feeling it and doing it. So definitely the more people that can participate in Pangaea and also validate on Harmony Network, for us, the better. That's a win in our books.
Be part of history, right? That's exactly what we're doing right now. Nick, thank you so much for your time. We got to do this again soon, man. I have a ton of questions, but I know that you're pressed for time as well. So we'll hopefully we can circle back soon.
Yeah, we can do a follow-up anytime. You just let me know.
Sounds good, brother.
All right. Take care.
You too.